listening to the Unshackle Your Life podcast with Debbie Colburn, and each week we talk all things money, business, personal growth, and we dive deep, exploring the hundreds of things that shackle us unconsciously from our own true potential. And you'll discover tips and tactics to start unlocking your shackles and release an extraordinary life. Thanks for spending time with me today, and let's dive right in. Hey everybody, and welcome to the very first episode with a guest of the Unshackle Your Life podcast. And I'm here today with the master of reinventing your life, author and TEDx speaker, Craig Stanlin. Craig, thank you for joining us today.
Debbie, thank you so much for having me on and for having me on as the first guest. I am honored, and I hope that I live up to that honor. We've known each other for a while now, so I am super excited to have this conversation.
Excellent. So I'm really excited to talk to you because what you've achieved is actually pretty amazing. But I know that despite coming from a pretty wonderful upbringing, a loving family and friends, and a great career, that you had a bit of an off course. And that off course almost tipped the scales into you wanting to take your life. And I'd like you to talk to the listeners, share your story a little bit, but in the context of this question, does one bad choice define us forever?
What a powerful question, and what a wonderful way to begin. And I would say that one choice does not define us forever. There is something that I love to say, which I think is so critically important for everybody to understand, regardless of what they've gone through in their lives. But it's this: our past cannot define us without our consent. And I think that's something so important for everybody to be able to connect with.
So you have do you want to share your story? Because your story is pretty incredible.
Thank you so much. And I would love to, just so people have a little bit of context and background as we start digging into, which I'm sure you're going to be more amazing questions that you have. So really, let's say on September 30th, 2012, I had what everybody would consider was it all. I owned 4 homes. I drove the BMWs. I wore the 5-figure watches. I had VIP status at some of the best restaurants in Manhattan and in Greenwich, Connecticut. I was married to an amazing, beautiful wife. Everything looked spectacular. And then on October 1st, 2013, I lost it all, because that's the day I was arrested by the FBI. For just under a year, I committed fraud against one of the largest technology companies in the world. I knew what I was doing was wrong, but I moved forward anyway. And it all caught up to me on that day when I received the following voicemail. Mr. Stanlin, this is Special Agent McTiernan with the FBI. We are at your residence and have a warrant for your arrest. You need to call us and come home immediately, or we will issue a warrant with the federal marshals. And to say that's the day that my life changed is a bit of an understatement, but that's the beginning. That's the beginning of my story. That's really where things took place.
And you ended up in prison for 2 years? Is that
right?
I
was charged with 1 count of mail fraud, and I pled guilty because I was, and the sentence was 24 months of federal prison, of which I did 15 months at the Otisville Federal Prison Camp. And then I did 6 months at the Brooklyn Halfway House. And that was divided amongst 4 months at the actual Brooklyn Halfway House and 2 months on home confinement with an ankle bracelet. So all told, it was 21 months that I was under the auspices of the Bureau of Prisons. 3 months were taken off because I behaved myself. So I had 3 months off for good time.
And you smiled a lot, right?
I smiled a lot, which people picked up on as soon as I got into prison. When I realized Otisville is actually, in terms, this might sound ridiculous, but it's actually a fairly pretty place for a prison. Believe it or not, it's actually quite pretty. And when I realized that I was going to be with other white collar offenders, nonviolent drug offenders, when I realized that my safety was not a concern, it was such a weight off of my shoulders that I did have a smile on my face. And my fellow inmates picked up on that really quickly, and I got the nickname Smiley.
And I've known you now for, I think it's about a year and a half, and you're always smiling. It's one of your trademarks. So I know that a lot of people, you know, I'm in a similar situation, although I didn't spend any time in prison. A lot of people ask us, why did we do what we do? So my first question for you is, I know many of us are scared to ask life for what we really, really want. So how would you answer this question today? What was I so afraid of that put you in that situation?
Again, I love your second question, and I love it so much. You're just like completely hitting the home runs here. And it's very easy. It took a long time for me to get to this. I was afraid of being seen as less than. That is to the core of it. I was afraid of being seen less than. And I'll go into what that means. It meant I would have had to be honest with my wife at the time and to tell her that my paychecks were shrinking, our expenses were increasing, and that I couldn't afford the lifestyle that I had presented and that I had created and that we were living, that we had to scale back, that I wasn't happy doing what I was doing, that I wanted to be more entrepreneurial, that I wanted to create something, but I was too damn afraid of letting go of all the things that I thought had made me, me. And it would have meant being seen as less than. And now I realize how foolish that is and what an act of courage that is. And I have no way of knowing what her response would be. I don't have a crystal ball into her brain, but I know the person she is and the character that she is. And I think she would have absolutely loved me more had I had the courage to do that.
Yeah, and you're speaking to probably the majority of the human population. They feel the same way. They struggle with, you know, not having enough, trying to keep up with the Joneses, and they're afraid to step out and be themselves. So I hope we're going to dive more into those pieces, but I wanted to get that right up front. So my next, you know me, I ask questions all the time. So what is your biggest fear? And I know fear has been one of your things running in behind. What's your biggest fear right now, since we know that you've overcome your biggest fear? I think you had this from a childhood of public speaking. You've overcome the fear of sharing because you had an amazing book launch and you're still doing that, and this is still part of it. What's your biggest fear now?
I've been giving this a lot of thought because I turned 48 on August 5th. And I think birthdays are a wonderful time to reflect, kind of like New Year's, and to just look back and to see where I want to go and to see what I want to create. And the realization that I'm on the back nine of my life. And I have a tattoo on my right forearm. It's upside down to everybody else, but it's right side up to me. And it's a reminder, and it's memento mori, which is Latin for remember you will die, or some translations are remember you must die. And it sounds morbid, but it's a celebration of life. To me, it's a reminder to live fully, which is part of my mantra. And the answer to your question ties to all of that. I fear screwing up what I consider my second chance at life and not living fully and not living full out. That's what I fear.
Okay, that's cool. Well, I think you know my dog. He's sleeping somewhere, but his name is Moment. And
that's beautiful.
His registered name is Old Sod's Moment in Time, and he's the reminder to everybody who meets him that every moment matters. Just a little segue from your thing. So I know that you're not going to screw up your second nine, because the second nine, because of your age, is going to be a lot longer than you think it is, because I'm a little bit older than you, and our second nine used to end at about 80-ish, and now it's into 100. So you have lots of time. And it's not morbid, because Brendan Burchard talks openly about his mortality motivation, about the fact that after an almost life-ending car accident, that he realized that every day matters, every moment matters, every second matters, and it's just how we use them and how we see them, and not, we're going to screw up some, but it's what we learn from that, right?
Oh, I don't think, if we're not screwing up, we're not living life fully. If we are living in such a quote unquote safe way that no mistakes are being made, I don't think that's living at all. I think that's a prison cell of our own making, one of the many that we construct for ourselves. Exactly.
Okay, so do you find that old stuff, hurts, mistakes, indiscretions from your past, they're bubbling up, they're still bubbling up for you when you start clearing a block or a fear? I know that happens to me when I pull something out of the way and I overcome a fear, then more stuff bubbles up that I have to work on. Do you find that happens to you?
Absolutely. Absolutely. And I think that's actually an inherent part of the process. I think ours is a journey with no actual destination. And it is just, as soon as we, in a sense, purge something, we clear something, that's going to make room for good things to come into our life. But at the same time, it's also going to make room for something that was behind it, something deep inside of us. It's going to allow that then to come up to the surface. That thing has always been there, but we didn't have the awareness of it until we moved through that particular block, whatever that may be. And I know for me, and I'll share this because I think it's important, during the biggest parts of my reinvention, that was about, let's say, the first 4 years from being arrested, and about 4 years after my arrest, that 4-year time period of reinvention, there were moments of obviously such valleys, such bottoms, but I would catapult myself up out of those. And they were these epiphany moments when something would clear and the dots would connect internally, where I just didn't understand something on an intelligence level. I understood it intrinsically. I embodied it, and I was able to live that way. And I do that, and then I'm on this new high, and then there'd be that next drop, and it was that backfill. It was that things that were in there that were coming up because I moved the others out of the way.
I love that. And I hope people listening really get that, because I think people get stuck. They think they can move one boulder out of the way, and then it's like clear sailing all the way up to the top. But it's like, there's always going to be boulders, but the more boulders you move, the more tools you have in your toolbox, the more emotional resilience, all that stuff builds up, and you can move those boulders faster, and you can see them, and you see more ways to get around them and over them, like the Berenstain Bears, over, under, around, stuff like that. So you work with, I don't exactly know who you work with, but I know that you work with people who, for whatever reason, they want to or maybe need to reinvent themselves. Obviously, you're a reinvention architect. So some might be at what you would call rock bottom, which is, we all know rock bottom is different for everybody. How do you describe rock bottom?
That is such a personal and subjective thing, and it's unique to the individual. What is rock bottom for me might not be rock bottom for someone else. A breakup, a relationship that went on for a year that recently broke up, that could be rock bottom for someone. Going to prison could be rock bottom for someone. And I think it really comes down to, how would one define it? It's feeling lost and no way out. For me, when I was at my rock bottom, I would hear people say that there's a light at the end of the tunnel. I couldn't see a light. There was no light. And that to me is the definition of rock bottom. And however we get to that point is, like I said, unique, but I think that's a pretty accurate way of capturing it.
Yeah, I think you're bang on there. I used to used to be a little bit judgmental when people would say, oh, I've hit rock bottom, and it's like because their boyfriend broke up with them, their boyfriend of 6 months. And I realized, like you, after time, everybody, because of backgrounds and so on, everybody sees it differently. For me, I can pinpoint rock bottom to being one exact moment. And I was standing on the sidewalk at an intersection with lights, and the lights would change and I wouldn't cross the road. Lights would change and it took me 4 cycles of lights before I had the confidence to be able to step across to cross the road. That for me was rock bottom. And that was when I walked out of the lawyer's office. I knew that is the point, that everything changed from there.
And what's so amazing about that is, I think when we have these open and candid conversations about our rock bottoms, I've never stood at a light and waited for 4 cycles to change before crossing the street, but I know how you felt. I can imagine that. And I felt it in my own rock bottom. And I think that's why it's so important that we share our stories and have these platforms and these conversations so that we can work through, see that we're not alone. And I think that's so important, because our stories are all unique, but the emotions behind them, that's where we as humans connect.
Yeah, exactly. So can you share what someone, and I'm sure you do this with your clients, what someone could do if no matter what they tried, we talk about this rock bottom, they can't envision a future for themselves. And I know I've been there, and I'm a big thinker and believer, but I just can't see what the future holds for me beyond the box that I see right now. What could someone do to start seeing a bit more of the future?
I will tell you a practice that I did, and I believe this is absolutely universal, and it is practicing acceptance. It is acceptance of our current reality, whatever that may be. And I'll tell you why I think this is important, and I'll use the story of me doing it inside prison. I was so consumed by the choices that I made. I was so stuck in the past. And I'm sitting in the Otisville Federal Prison Library, and I'm journaling, woe is me. And I wish I was home. I wish I was with my wife. I wish I was on my couch with my cat and my dog. By the way, she had already told me that she was leaving me. So this was an impossibility. And plus, it's not like you can just walk out of prison. I was there for however long I was going to be. That was my reality. But I was wishing. And I realized I was fighting a past and a present circumstance that cannot be anything other than they are. And I took my pen and I started writing. I accept that I made the choices that I made. I accept that I hurt my wife. I accept that I hurt my family. I accept that I'm financially ruined. I accept. I wrote about maybe a total of 3/4 of a page of things that I had to accept that I was wishing were different. And why I think that is, for somebody who's at rock bottom, who doesn't see a future, why I think this is important is, although it hurt like hell to accept all of those things, it gave me a baseline in which to start over, because I was no longer stuck in the past. And when I was stuck in that past, every single time I looked to my future, there wasn't one, because I was living from the past. Now that I had given myself a baseline, a crappy baseline, because I was in prison and I was financially ruined, but I had a starting line. And I found that to be so liberating. And I actually felt freedom inside of prison. And so that's what I really think the first step is, that acceptance. It puts us in the present. And when we're present, I believe that opens up the door to a opportunity and a possibility in the future.
Okay, so you've just opened up 3 questions that I had written down here. So you and I both know that people struggle with acceptance. Why do you think they struggle with accepting that reality? I am a.
It hurts. It hurts. It can be very painful. And nobody wants to do that. It's actually, even though rumination of the past feels horrible, for me, it allowed me to be a bit of the victim. And being the bit of a victim is, woe is me, look at me, help me out. There's a bit of comfort in that, to sit and say, I made terrible choices that hurt people I love. and I'm financially ruined is very painful to admit. And I think that's why people don't want to practice acceptance. And I will also put another point to this. Acceptance is very simple in practice, harder in execution, but because it's so simple in practice, I think it's very easy to dismiss it. Because in acceptance, there's really nothing to do other than to accept. And that sounds redundant, but it's so simple that I believe we as humans like to overcomplicate things, and there's nothing to do. And it seems like it can't be that easy.
Queen of overcomplication. That's awesome. I'm so glad you shared it that way, because it's so important. So the other piece to that is obviously you started journaling and writing stuff out, but we also know that people are resistant to, let's call it journaling. If you say someone, they think it's some sort of massive task. And again, why do you think they're resistant to writing? And we say writing, but we really mean you can hit record on your phone, you can scroll it out on a piece of paper, you can write in the sand on the beach. Why are people, is it the same reason that they're resistant to journaling? Because it's almost too easy, and it's also hurtful? Is that why?
Some of the objections that I've received from clients, from friends, why they don't journal, I don't have the time, which is BS. Because if it's important enough, we will find the time. It is that it is too simple. It is very similar to when I suggest meditation to people. Oh, it doesn't work for me. I can't do it. I get wrapped up in the words. They overcomplicate it in their minds. But I'm going to go with something that I think is more of an accurate answer. Oftentimes, if people are stuck somewhere, and we offer solutions to get them out of their doldrums, if they're not ready to accept that information, they're just not going to accept it. And they want to. They may say that they want to change, but until they're actually willing to change, it's just going to fall on deaf ears. And those pieces of advice are just going to, even though I know for a fact journaling, I believe it works for everyone. But unless you're willing to actually do it, it's not going to work. And you're going to find all those obstacles. And there's more comfort staying in the crappy area that you are than putting yourself out into a level of discomfort and doing something that you really don't know how to do, even though it's so simple as, like you said, hitting record or grabbing a pen and paper.
Yeah, and I think you're absolutely right in that in my books that I track books that I want to read. I put a little star beside them, and I go back to them when I know it's the right time to go back to them. So I think people with a growth mindset, or people who are interested in having a growth mindset or improving their thinking, or moving their life forward, sometimes it does take time for them to build the foundation to be comfortable enough. And I know it's almost an oxymoron, but feeling like they're in the right mental space to be able to put stuff down on paper. Because what comes out on paper sometimes is really scary. And you hope nobody ever sees it.
It can be so utterly frightening to see the inner dialogue. And we may live with that chatter. We do live with that chatter. The chatter doesn't stop, but to actually write it, to put it into physical manifestation, can be extremely frightening. But I believe that is the power of journaling, because when we get it out of ourselves, we are able to purge it out of our systems. And then when I journal long enough, patterns and themes start coming up. Certain words start coming up. This happened particularly when I first started with journaling. And from there, I could say, fear keeps coming up. I'm not necessarily using the word fear, but I was lying, I was avoiding, I was doing all these things. Why do these things keep coming up, and what is their common theme? It's fear. Yeah. And so now all of a sudden I'm like, ooh, that's something to dig into deeper. Why am I afraid? And you said before, you said that you love asking questions. I think questions is such a powerful tool to incorporate into a journaling practice. just asking questions. It's not about having the right or wrong answers. It's just asking questions to open up new ways of thinking.
And I think you do something similar to me, which is the why question. You write down something and then you write why, and you just keep asking why each new answer. You just keep asking why and to dive down and dive down. I've done that with why, what, and so on. And it's been quite revealing when you've gone down 10 layers to find out what the real story is underneath, not the media reel that's running in your head.
The why is so powerful, and it's a little bit like the annoying 5-year-old. Well, the sky is blue. Why? Well, because of the way the year's. Why? I mean, and just continuing to drill down. But you're right. You find there's always a thing behind the thing, and there can be 10 layers of things, but there are always those things. And to get to that is the real gold. That is the gold. And for the listeners, I want to, as I feel like we may have just jumped a little bit ahead in a journaling practice. For the listeners, I just want to say, if you are interested in a journaling practice, it's as simple as a pen and paper. Don't worry about spelling. Don't worry about grammar, and vomit on the page. Just let it all out. Nobody's ever going to read it. And I personally don't reread my journal entries. I do not go back and revisit them. Couple reasons. I'm getting it out of my system and I don't need to reread it. And number two, I actually can't read my own handwriting. But
I just actually finished reading or listening, and this is a highly recommended book, Matthew McConaughey's Green Lights on Audible, because it's like an audio movie, because he's narrating it, and he actually has gone back to his journals, because he's been journaling since he was 12, and he's seen his whole entire life, and he walks through them in the concept of all yellow lights and red lights eventually change into a green light. And decisions and choices. So it's interesting. I go back and look at mine every once in a while, but not unless I have a purpose for going back and looking at. And for me, it's to see how far I've actually come, and that's a characteristic from my mountain climbing. I rarely look at where I'm going at the summit. Every once in a while, I'll look at that, but I do look back just to see how far I've come. And I know that's a characteristic that I've carried over from that. So I'm wondering if you could just go into your routines, because in your book, you talk about you kind of had some routines going into before you went to prison, but prison really forced you to create routines. And I think you've maintained those throughout. Journaling is one of them, right? Can you talk about those?
I think a routine is so unbelievably important in creating the lives that we want to create, as long as the routine is still serving us. And I think that's an important caveat to go into before I go into my morning routine. My morning routine, I wake up anywhere between 5 a.m. and 6 a.m. I do not use an alarm. I allow my body to wake up when it feels like waking up. I will say a few affirmations to myself in the morning. I will express a few things that I'm grateful for. And I will also ask myself a question. What's going to move the needle most today? What am I scared of today? The questions vary. It just is when I'm in that fuzzy state, when you're in that cozy state, when you're just waking up and the bed is nice and comfortable and the stresses of the day haven't come in and the brain is just fully open. So I allow myself just to go wherever that goes. And the answers will come to me very crystal clear. So then I wake up, I make my bed. I jump into an ice cold shower. First thing I do is jump into an ice cold shower. I've been doing that one I've actually been doing all of these for years. After the shower, I will then meditate. And I meditate in front of a red light. So I get some red light therapy. I'm kind of killing two birds with one stone. I do a mantra-based meditation for 20 minutes, which is actually perfectly in conjunction with the timer of the red light. The red light also has, when the light shut off, it goes into a cool down mode, and that is 5 minutes. So after my meditation, I go into 5 minutes of affirmations, and I just repeat 3 affirmations. over and over again. Then from there, I turn on my coffee pot and I do about a 10 to 15 minute yoga practice, followed by a 5 to 10 minute kind of HIIT routine, high intensity training, mostly focused on my legs just to get the blood flowing. So now my coffee is made. I've got a nice little workout. I grab my pen and paper. If the weather permitting, I go to my balcony, and that's when I start journaling. And I usually start with my gratitude practice. What am I grateful for? And I will implement the why question in that as well. I'm grateful that my coffee tastes good this morning. Why? I mean, it sounds silly, but it's nice to go a little bit deeper on that.
Right.
I then go into future gratitude. What are my top 5 goals? And I write the gratitude as if they've already happened. I'm grateful I've sold X amount of copies of my book. I'm grateful I've landed 2 speaking gigs. And I write those down as if they've already happened. Then I go into my stream of conscious journaling. Then it's just a free for all. There's no rhyme or reason. It's whatever comes to mind. And I will quite literally, I write ahs and ums. I write the things that are in my brain. If I say, I don't know if I can curse on here, and it's okay if I can't.
Go ahead.
Okay. I will literally write, fuck, it's hot out here. Like if all of a sudden I feel like it's hot out on the balcony, or, oh shit, that's really something important. I capture everything in real time to the best of my ability. And I just let it go for as long as I feel like I get it out of me. And then I'll go into the James Altucher 10 ideas a day. I write my 10 ideas a day, 10 books I'd like to write, 10 chapter ideas, 10 blogs I'd like to write, 10 places I'd like to visit, whatever it may be, really getting that idea muscle going. Then from there, I have a document on Evernote that I will read, and it is my 5 stretch goals, 5 big audacious goals. Then it's followed by 5 goals that are what I call, and I got this, I can't remember the name of the book, but the next ideal frame. And those are 3-month goals. So I go through that. Then I have underneath there, who do I have to become in order to make those goals a reality? Somebody who does those things. What do? But they network with 3 different people a week. They do this, they do that, and I do, he does, actually, that's how I write it. He does that.
Yeah.
And then I write my truths. I am worthy. I trust myself. I am. And I have that. I read that every single morning. And then I sit down at the keyboard and my workday starts.
Cool. We have very similar practices. Very similar. I've tried on a number of occasions. I have Headspace. I do meditation, but I'm not consistent. It's not a ritual routine. But for me, my meditation practice is outside walking. That's it. It's clear my head, do stuff, not with the dog. That's too much social life happening, but it's the same thing. And I don't do, I've tried 10, James Altucher's 10 ideas. I tend to, Jay Samit does 3. So I do 3, but I do it in a 30-day block, but then I go back and look at them and go, okay, so what could I do? It's a slightly different permutation, but it's all about getting the brain thinking about freeing stuff up, because that second part of what you're talking about, that future pacing yourself, you say these gratitude of things that have happened in the future, how does that person think or behave? It's hard to dig into those feelings and thoughts if you aren't freeing up those other ideas, because you've still got that yourself in a box. The ideas open that box up. So
they really do. And I was on James's podcast. I was fortunate to be a guest on his podcast. And when I told him about my meditation, gratitude, and journaling practice, I love the way he expressed it. He said, you were clearing the decks. You were making space. And it's funny, I've been doing them for years, but I never looked at it in that regard. And he's absolutely right. That was clearing the decks to make space for what else can come in.
Yeah, exactly.
And I've really adopted that now, and also in my, because I am a reinvention architect. So I will say, we've got to clear the land before we can build the foundation.
Right, right. And I think that that's people don't realize that your head is there's an awful lot of high rises in there that need to come down before you can build that new development in there. So you kind of mentioned it in passing, but I want to dive into something that you say in your book, and I'm looking at my notes because it's a big question. You have your book Blank Canvas. It's available on Amazon. It's also available in Kindle and so on. It's a fabulous book for the listeners. I've read it twice already. It's an amazing book. It's like a guidebook of what you need to do to reinvent your life. So you talk about, there's a whole bunch of examples of lying. And I know right at the very beginning of this interview, you talked about not wanting to tell your ex-wife, your wife at the time, that what you were doing isn't right. You didn't want to lie. But I just pulled some examples from the book of what you referred to. What food can I steal from my friends when you were working in the kitchen? Your mom's stolen free cookies from the hotel lobby. Hiding behind, you refer to something as hiding behind lies and the things you could buy. You smuggled a phone into the halfway house. And I'm not pointing fingers. These are things that you talk about in your book. Least of all, the things that you said to your wife. And the final one was at the gym saying, no, it's not busy when you plan to work out. And you call yourself out on that specific one as an integrity breach. Now, lying is such a fine line, especially when it seems like everybody in the world does it. Now, I have a son who in my family we commonly call a serial liar. And I know that sounds a little odd, but if the level of shame that's carried by some of the people in the support group that we're in, my son, even though he's not in that area because of a variety of things that have occurred in his life, carries a staggering level of shame, and he lies to protect himself. So why do you think people, and I'm talking about everyone, why do you think we lie? And why do you think we don't listen to our inner voice when we do lie?
This is a big
It's a big
question. This is a big question. And I think, but so there's so many different ways to answer it because there are so many different lies. But I really think what it can boil down to is this. We think that we can see the future. And if we're going to tell the truth, the outcome is going to be bad. And that is the only thing. We are, I believe when we lie, we are operating under the illusion of control, that we have control over a situation. And we're trying to exert that control over a situation. To lie to somebody, we're trying to achieve an outcome that we want.
Yeah, trying to predict, you're predicting an outcome. And
we're
by
outcome.
Doing this thing, that will happen.
Using the gym as an example. And just for a little bit further context for the listeners, after prison, I was really fortunate to get a job at a gym in the Lower East Side of Manhattan. Part of my job was selling gym memberships. And I was instructed by the owner to say, it was a small, tight space. We're in New York City. It's small, tight space. There's a lot of people. And everybody would inevitably ask, is it going to be busy when I plan on working out? Well, when do you plan on working out? 6 p.m., right after work. Yes, the fact is, yes, it's going to be like any other gym on the planet. That's when people work out. But we were instructed to say, no, it's not. And what I was trying to do in doing that was my outcome was the sale. The outcome was to make sure that I make my boss happy, to make sure that I make the gym money, and I got commissions on those sales. So it was financial, it was emotional. There were a lot of things I was trying to control by saying that lie. And I think that's what it really is that we're just trying to control the situation. And when we understand that we literally have no control, that I believe all of life is an illusion of control, when we let that go, we can then be honest and we can practice that integrity. And we know that we may not get the response back that we want. But when we trust ourselves, we know that we'll trust that we'll be okay, whatever happens.
So why did you, in that particular instance, because it really stuck out for me in the book, why do you think you were able to hear your inner voice then when you know your inner voice was talking to you before when you were committing the fraud? Why did you listen to it then versus earlier on in your story? What had changed for you?
I just grew tired. I didn't want to be that person anymore. I had this amazing second chance to rebuild my life, which quite frankly, a lot of us don't have such a gift to be able to recreate, to reinvent into whatever we want. And I knew that it just wasn't who I wanted to be. And what's interesting, when I was committing the crime and the voice was chiming in, it had the physical manifestations. It had the squeezing of the heart. It had the flush of the cheeks and the uneasiness in the stomach. So all those physical manifestations were there and I ignored them. But now, even at the gym with that minor little lie of, no, it's not busy when you plan on working out, all of those physical manifestations came rushing back, and they were far too loud for me to ignore with where I was in my life and what I wanted to create. And I think Go ahead, please.
I think that's this scenario where people talk about sometimes you can get a hint with a feather. Sometimes it's someone just gives you a shove, and sometimes you just simply need the 2x4 to get your attention. And it seems like you've been able to get yourself into a position where it really just took a feather to get your attention, as opposed to the full-on front-end loader.
I love that analogy. And also, the word integrity is so interesting. But the way that we're talking about it, in the context that we're talking about it now, it's very easy to tie to the definition of honesty, telling the truth. But what I liked, and this was a little part of that feather, was the second definition of integrity. We can talk about a physical structure as having integrity. That building has integrity. And I applied that to myself, to my own body. And I said, if I don't have integrity, would I want to live inside my own body? I'm not going to live inside a building that a building inspector has deemed does not have structural integrity. So why would I want to live in my body if I don't have that? And that was a big part of that feather. That is a great
analogy. So I want to go back to what I referred to in the introduction. So suicide, we know there's a lot of talk in the world about suicide. It's a big discussion. And your TEDx talk starts off with a brilliant, heart-wrenching description of your dream of killing yourself, but you didn't. And we're super grateful that you didn't. But what I found curious is that one of the biggest things that you overcame to reinvent your life, shame, was in fact in your book you refer to as the exact thing that saved your life. You talk about embarrassment and shame as being the reasons why you wouldn't want to kill yourself. You described a scene of yourself in the kitchen on the floor and Kyla coming in and talk about, I just couldn't because of the embarrassment and shame. It's kind of puzzling, right? Can you talk a little bit about how that felt to realize that you really didn't want to end your life?
It was such a pivotal moment, and it really came from, and we talk about this in the TED Talk and in my book, but I was planning on how I was going to kill myself, and I couldn't share that with anybody. My friend Sean asked to come visit me in prison, and I said, wow, I can tell Sean, I can get this off of my chest. I can get it out. And I go to tell Sean, but he all of a sudden jumps into his life's a mess. He's getting a divorce, he's got money issues, work issues. And I realized that my friend needed me. And that's when I realized I had value. And that was that light switch where I didn't want to kill myself, which opened up the door I think this is going to answer your question. I hope this answers your question, was really the understanding. And I think this is so important for anybody who finds themselves at rock bottom, who doesn't see a light at the end of the tunnel, who may be contemplating suicide, is to really ask yourself, and something that I definitively understood in that moment, or right after that moment, it's not that I wanted to die. I just didn't want to feel that way anymore. And
I'm so glad you put that sentence out there, because I was hoping you would.
It's so critically important. What a massive delineation. What a massive delineation to just understand that I didn't want to feel that way anymore. And the shortest route to that was ending my life, but I didn't want to die. It's mind-blowing.
And I know exactly what you mean, because I heard that exact sentence from my son. He's going through a lot of shit right now. And what my next guest that's coming on in a week or so coaches men going through what my son is going through. But he said the same thing. I don't want to feel this way anymore. But what do I do?
And that is, so this opens up a whole different, in a sense, Pandora's box. What do I do? And I would say it's practicing acceptance. But, practice acceptance, that's an inner thing. When we're in those dark moments, we have to do what I believe is so hard for us to do, and it's talk to somebody. Shame lives and breathes in the dark. It is like a fungus, and it just grows in the darkest and coldest and nastiest of places. And we have to open up the door and shine a light on it. And we do that by sharing our story. And I would also say, we're going to go back to journaling, because I think this is important. If we find ourselves not in a position to be able to share with somebody, if the shame is just too much, but to at least be able to share with ourselves as a starting point, to be able to write it down, to be able to write the words down, leading towards finding somebody that you can trust and just sharing. And when we start sharing those stories and we realize that we're not alone, because shame will also tell us that we're alone, that we are isolated, that nobody else on the planet feels like how we feel right now. But when we open up our mouths, when we're honest and we're transparent, and we find out that other people feel that way, all of a sudden, when you're not alone anymore, changes the dynamic.
And I think I work primarily with men, and I think this is a harder thing for men to open up about, because they don't call it shame. They call it, I feel like I'm letting my family down. Everybody wants everything from me, and my paycheck doesn't go far enough. They never out and out. My son is an anomaly. He grew up in a family of women, so he tends to be more emotional in that respect. But the majority of men, they just don't say, "Oh my gosh, I'm suffering with so much shame. I'm so embarrassed." They just don't say it, because their friends go, "Oh God, man up, get a pair of balls." Men are sometimes harder with other men than women are with women, and women are pretty brutal sometimes. So that's tough, and I'm glad you're talking about that, because I know that that's something in your practice, in your coaching business, that you work a lot with clients on, is shame. Is that correct?
Absolutely. Yeah. Because shame is it's the lowest energy emotion that we can feel. And it's impossible to reinvent your life, to create something new, if you're consumed with shame. It's going to be the obstacle that makes all other things impossible. And when we move through the obstacle of shame, what we were talking about before, pushing things out so that new things can come in. When we start unraveling shame, what that allows us to bring in is amazing. It's absolutely amazing, because that shame is such a huge block. And when we clear that block, I mean, it's just like going from a one-lane highway to a 5-lane expressway.
Wow. I know that there's lots of listeners who are going, I need to get on the phone with Craig in this. So let's talk about I want to talk about something related to shame, but it's the pieces of shame that people don't actually see. So I'm referring a little bit to my son because he's the classic case of this, but it's what I call the compounding burden of shame. When people try to help you with the best of intentions and what they're doing, it is helpful. But what it actually does is it exacerbates the feelings of shame. And in your book, you refer to a particular scenario at Christmas where someone in your family gave you a check. Can you talk about that what I'm talking about?
Absolutely. I was arrested on October 1st, 2013, and Christmas was right around the corner, and I went to my father and stepmother's, and they pulled my wife at the time and I aside to give us our card, and it was just a very generous check. It was just a very generous check because they knew what we were going through. We knew that the money had all been frozen up, and it was just so meaningful, and it cut like razor blades running through my veins because I wasn't worthy of that. With all the crap I had done, who am I to deserve this wonderfully generous gift? It burned so badly. And I love that compounding interest of shame. That is an example of that. People mean well, but we have to understand that we are worthy. It's not our decision to extend that help. That's the other person's decision. They've decided that it's worth their financial investment, their time investment, their emotional investment. And we just have to learn to let that through and in. But it's not easy. It is not easy. It hurts so badly. My family was such rock stars. They were such rock stars through everything. And God, did that hurt every single moment.
I know. You're in a similar situation for me. So I'm just going to move to the questions. You're in a same position as me in that your family was able to help you out, guide you, and you still went to prison. I didn't. Substantially different scenario, different country, different situation. What would you say to someone who, and I'm going to say it's probably less than 50% of situations where people have family or friends or whatever that they bail on them. What would you say to someone who's really beating themselves up because someone in their family doesn't want to talk to them anymore, their best friends have walked away from them, even their coworkers don't, if they have any? What would you say to them to help them get past that? Because I know that there's a silver lining to that situation.
It's an extremely difficult component to going through any adversity is the loss of those closest to you. That is something that's very real and happens to a tremendous amount of people. And what I would say is this, I'm not sure if you're going to expect this, but what a gift that is. What a gift that is. Because that to me is the person showing their true colors. And to not have them in your life anymore is actually a gift to you. To have them. Do you agree? Yeah, I think it's
100%. Yeah, I'm 100% on that. For me, it's called shedding friends, shedding them. And I know that if they're meant to be in your life, they will come back. It may take years, but the majority of the time they're not meant to be. They're not meant to be there. We've had situations. I think I've talked about it in the support group where there was a point where my family felt like Peyton Place or some sort of reality. And sisters and brothers wouldn't talk to each other. They wouldn't be in the same room for years. But that's not the situation now. So it does change. And it's hard, and it makes it, it's back to that judgment thing. We judge ourselves as being not worthy because people choose not to be in our camp. But that's a good thing. I totally agree.
It's a good thing. They're showing their true colors. And like you said, things can change. And something so important to remember is judgments are nothing more than self-hate projected outwards. And that was the author Sherry Huber said that. And I think that's just such a brilliant thing. So when friends and family bail, when they make those judgments, that is not a reflection on us, even though it feels that way and it hurts like hell. It's something inside of that individual that they can't cope with the situation. There's some form of self-hate. There's something that they hate about themselves that they can't cope with the situation. And the easiest thing for them to do is to remove themselves from said situation. And it sucks to be on the receiving end of that. And when you're first introduced to a good friend leaving, it's going to hurt like crazy. And it takes some time to realize that it was a gift. But I can promise you that it is a gift.
Awesome. So another question that I have, and I've had this in various different areas, is what would you say to someone who's trying to bury their past mistakes, hide them, something that they're ashamed of? When I say bury it, there's a myriad of ways that people try to make that disappear. Good or bad? What do you think?
Bad. Absolutely bad. I think that's a terrible, terrible thing that flies in the face of acceptance. There is an ancient Japanese art form called kintsugi. And when a piece of pottery is broken, the artist will put it back together, and they use a lacquer that is made up of silver, gold, sometimes even platinum. And the finished product is more beautiful than the original. And it's beautiful because of the cracks. It's beautiful because of where it was broken. And when we try to obscure and hide our cracks, which are our past, our mistakes, we try to do that, we are denying a piece of what has made us, us. How will we ever be whole if we deny something that has made us who we are today? We're never going to be whole. And when we're never going to be whole, we give birth to that shame. The more we try to hide something, the more we fuel shame. The more we accept our cracks, the more we share our cracks with others, we make ourselves whole. We dissolve that shame, and we really start to live fully because we're no longer hiding. I mean, do we want to hide our entire lives? That's a lot of work. That's a prison cell. Or do we want to walk out of that cell and have nothing to hide?
Yeah, I love that, the way you describe it. It's like you spend your life always looking over your shoulder, waiting for someone to dig it up, and in the world of Google and all that sort of stuff, nothing is truly hidden. It really isn't. You can think it is, but it's not.
It's not. And you know what I find interesting, reminded me when you asked the question on the group, sometimes it comes up of trying to manipulate Google and paying for services to, knock our names, down the list so they don't show up. And it's a lot of money to do that. And the fact is, if somebody wants to find out, they're going to find out because it is there. And again, going on that hiding thing, if there's something that we hide, we start hiding. We're saying that there's something broken about us and that we're ashamed of it. And that's that shame. It's not a place I want to live.
Yeah, me neither. And anybody that knows my story knows that for 20 plus years, that was my story. Not Google erasing, but I was trying to run away from that. And we're not men in black with a neuralizer. They can just, put it up. You can get it off of Google, but invariably there's somebody who knows your story, that it's in their brain, that it might be a cocktail party, that they meet somebody, and it just, like our discussion about vintage cars this morning, you just never know when a conversation is going to come up. So what was the one thing? I had another question. I'm doing really amazing here. Like I've got 4 pages and I'm almost through with page number 3, which I think is pretty good. So we've talked about acceptance. I don't want to repeat ourselves. So in our support group, so let me just, you and I met in Jeff Grant's white collar support group, which is a very confidential group that, it's a safe place that if you want to Google that, you can find that information. We talk about a lot about the horrible and the hurtful and the nasty things that we say to ourselves, whether we say it out loud or whether we say it in our head. And they're things that we would never, ever say about another person. And we literally are blaming ourselves, and we sentence ourselves to prison cells. I call my podcast Unshackle Your Life for that reason, because my prison cell is, my visual is shackles. Yours is, you talk about prison cells that you put people in. We call ourselves unworthy. We've talked about unworthiness a little bit today. In the book, you say, I don't deserve nice. It's what I deserve for what I've done. I did this to us. Do you have any tips on how someone can start interrupting those thoughts? And I know a lot of what you've talked about so far talks about those, but any specific things when you hear those words in your head, what do you do? I know what I do.
Well, I think there's a couple of different approaches on this. One that I'm going to lead with is a longer term approach. And this is why I like meditation. Meditation, doing it over a long enough period of time. I've been meditating for about 7 years. When those thoughts come up, I'm the witness to those thoughts. I am the observer of those thoughts. And as such, I realize that I am not those thoughts. And that's a huge differentiator for me. But that's the longer game. In a shorter game is two different things. One is really simple, and that is to break the pattern. It's very easy to fall into a pattern when the rumination, when the negative self-talk comes in. It requires awareness, which is not always the easiest thing. But once that ball starts going down the hill, we want to stop it. And we can stop it by changing what we're doing. If we're on the couch and yelling internally at ourselves, get up off the couch and go for a walk. If we're already going for a walk, do something else. Drop down and do push-ups. Break the pattern. Whatever it may be, is just having that awareness to snap yourself out of it and break that pattern. Number 2 is, again, this involves awareness, which can be a little bit trickier, but to play what I call the truth or story game. And it is to really identify what is the truth and what is the story. And I'll use an example from my own life. I used to believe wholeheartedly the following statement. I'm a federally convicted felon, and because of that, I'm a terrible human being. And could you imagine the pattern that started? Could you imagine the thoughts that would, right? The thoughts, the snowball that turns into an avalanche from believing that. So let's take that sentence down. And so what I did, I actually wrote the sentence down so I could see it, so I could visualize it. The first half of that sentence, I'm a federally convicted felon. True. No ifs, ands, or buts. It's true. Because of that, I'm a terrible human being. That's a story that I'm making up around the truth. There's no evidence to say that I'm a terrible human being. That is an opinion. That is my opinion. And it's a shitty opinion, but it's my opinion. But being able to differentiate between the truth and the story that we're making up around the truth is also a pattern interrupt that will allow us to step back from that.
That is awesome. So you've given some, if listeners don't take anything else from this, you've given them 3 steps on how to start breaking that thinking. Because first is awareness. Start hearing what you're saying to yourself. And I know we see this in the support group. We hear it come out of people's mouths. It's like, listen to what you're saying. So that's the first thing, is awareness. Listen to what you're saying. Number 2 is figure out what it is and interrupt the pattern. And the third is get it down on paper and then start figuring out how you call it a reframe. How do I reframe? How would I reframe that? Break it down. Basic English. What part of the sentence is true? What is fact? And what part of that sentence is just some creative, imaginative stuff that isn't serving you well?
And it's just another example just to show, and it's tied to the criminal thing. But I would also, I believed for a long time, I'm a felon. No girl is ever going to want to date me.
And we know that's not true.
And we know that's not true. So it's so that, I'm a felon. Yes, true. No girl is ever going to date me. No girl on the whole planet. There are what, 7.5 billion of us, and then cut that in half. It's 3.75 billion. Out of that, maybe there's a billion of eligible, bachelorettes that in my age range and all that stuff. So out of the billion, not one of them is going to want to date me. And it's sometimes also with that true story, it's kind of taking it to that absurd level, and really going to kind of a Tony Robbins technique, but taking it to that extreme level where you see the absurdity of some of the things that we say to ourselves.
Yeah, and I love that one because it's such a great example. It's, and I've heard that from people. No one's going to, yeah, they will. They're there. So I have, let me just see. Let's talk about opportunity. Earlier on, you mentioned something about opportunity, and most people, successful people, would describe luck as being when opportunity meets preparation. And you describe a moment in the book of where you're sitting outside watching some guys in I'm going to say yard, not knowing Otisville, but they're playing paddleball, and you have the thought, this might be an opportunity. How do you think people can start seeing more opportunities, or maybe start seeing one opportunity? Because there are people who just say there's no opportunities for me. Is it as simple as James Altucher's just doing 10 ideas a day? How did they start seeing opportunity?
I love James Altucher's 10 ideas a day. I think that's a brilliant executable way to start. Number two is to, and this is a tough one, but nothing really great is easy, is to get out of your comfort zone, to regularly challenge yourself to do different things. Because I see fear as a door on our path. It's like I wrote in the book, it's like a Salvador Dali painting. It's just an abstraction. There's a door in the middle of nowhere. We don't have to walk through the door. We can walk around the door. But we miss opportunities when we walk around the door, when we avoid the door. When we open that door, we open up to an entirely new world. And when we open up into a new world, we increase the number of opportunities and possibilities that are available to us. And we do that by continually facing the things that scare us, because we don't know what's going to come from that. And I think that is just a brilliant way to do that. And this is somewhat tied to getting out of your comfort zone, but it is the old Einstein adage. What is, insanity is doing the same thing over and over again and expecting something different. Before I was saying how important routine is, but if your routine is no longer serving you, that routine needs to be broken, because opportunities are not going to magically appear if you do the same exact thing every single day. And so having awareness to break that.
That is a fundamental piece that people don't get in the world of high performance. With the coaches and stuff, people talk about routine, but they never talk about the fact that your routine has to evolve, or it has to always be allowing you to have an opportunity to open more doors. They get stuck in routine where it starts putting a cap on it, putting a ceiling on their possibility. And I see that all the time. And in fact, this last COVID 18 months, I have felt that intimately, because my number one personal value is variety and uncertainty. I would travel all over the world. I'm moving all the time. And I felt that my creativity was going down. My idea bank was going down because I wasn't getting exposed to the things that really charged me up, and it just starting to feel that open up again. So absolutely. But you're talking about opening up a door, and I think everybody, I may date myself here, but I think everybody thinks when they open a door, that fear door, they're going to open it up to, in Beetlejuice, where they open the door into nothing and it's sand and there's big sandworms. I think they think that's what's going to happen.
I absolutely. And that's the, if we all had a crystal ball, we'd all play the winning lottery numbers. But that's predicting the future. That is, when I walk through this door, this is what's going to happen. We don't know. We have no idea what the future is. But I can tell you, I know from my own life, every time I've avoided the door it's sometimes very negative consequences, sometimes not so negative, but just not great consequences, very inconsequential type things. But every single time I walk through the door, even if I don't get the outcome that I want, there's magic, because the magic comes from crossing the threshold. That's it. That's where the magic is. The chapter in the book where I asked the girl out, where I was after prison, I was so frightened to ask this. There was a beautiful woman at this party that I was at. I mean, I was just so awestruck by her, figured she was completely out of my league. And I made the choice to ask her out. And the inner dialogue and the racing of my mind that started going of like, she doesn't want to date you. You're a convicted felon. You don't have the money for a girl like that. All these things. And I said, screw it. I'm doing it. And I walked through. I grabbed that door. I pushed open the door, walked through. And I felt it even before she answered. I felt the magic before she answered. And she said, thank you. That's very sweet, but I have a boyfriend. So maybe it wasn't the outcome that I was hoping for. Didn't matter. I put myself out there, and that's what matters.
Yeah. Yeah. I remember reading that one thinking, good for you. There's one of the 4 billion you don't have to ask anymore.
Right. I just crossed one of those off the list. I'm making progress.
Yeah, exactly. So here's a question. This is my last big question, and it's really out in left field. But what I found interesting as I read the book, and this is because a lot of what I coach in my program is money mindset with guys and so on. And this comes up, and it comes up a lot in another group that I'm in, is the focus on your credit score. At points in your life, in your journey, where it shouldn't even, it is so inconsequential to anything, but I know that that's a North American obsession. So how much do you think that thought came from living paycheck to paycheck, trying to fill a hole inside you with things? So paycheck to paycheck is a norm, okay? And it doesn't matter if you make $20K a year, $100K a year, $250,000 a year, or $1 million plus a year. It is a real thing in every level. So why was credit score so important to you?
It was the story that I was making up around it. And I was obsessed with the credit score after prison, because how am I going to buy a house? How am I going to buy a car? How am I going to do all these things that I, really thought I wanted to do and that I was going to do? And it was the story that I made up around it, that I'm not going to be able to live the life that I want unless I have a credit score that's of a certain level. And that's really all it was. It was tied to something much deeper than just the number. It was, and that's the case with so many of the things that we obsess about or that we may want. If we want some materialistic thing, I'm a firm believer that we don't want the thing itself. We want how we think that thing is going to make us feel. And I think that is the same exact thing with the credit score. It was just a connection to, it's very much the if-then scenario. If my credit score is this, then I'll be able to do that. And that's a terrible trap to fall into in any aspect of life. If I do X, then I can do Y. No, just figure out how to do Y.
Yeah.
You don't need X, just do Y.
That's so true. And as I was reading the book, like I had a point in my life, and I remember it so distinctly, standing there and screaming at the top of my lungs in my little 350 square foot converted horse stable, I don't give a fucking shit about my credit score. I'll never be able to afford anything again. I remember thinking that, but that was because like you say, I got stuck in the how, because all I could see was a certain thing based on what I'd done in the past. And once I got past that, it was like, that is so irrelevant in the big scheme of things. It's just a metric randomly assigned by a number of financial institutions. It doesn't define anything about us, but people think it does.
People think it does, and I think there are, credit score. I mean, hell, there are still people who talk about their SAT scores. I mean, that just, or their LSATs or whatever it may be. And it's like, that's great. You did well, but that's not who you are. We're not defined by that number, whatever that number may be. And just, moving beyond that. But it's just such it's a crutch. It's an easy crutch to fall onto.
Yeah. Okay. So we're winding up here. So you've ticked off at least 2 things that I know on your vision board. So I don't know all your vision board, but I know that the TEDx stage was one of them. Publishing a book with a real publisher, not self-publishing, was one of them. So you had a third one, which was to be on James Altucher's podcast as a guest. So tick, 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 tick. What can we expect from you next?
Oh, man, this is, so I'm going to answer it on my 48th. Okay, I am going to answer it with a very tangible thing, but I've got to answer this one this way first. On my 48th birthday, which was just about a week ago, I set 2 big audacious goals for myself. They are interwoven, and I'm not sharing them with anybody yet. And there's something very important to this. I believe that when we share our goals, when they are in their nascent stages, when they are just a tiny little seed that's just been planted in the soil, when we share them, and there's some scientific evidence actually to back this, we share them with somebody. If I was to tell you, I'd most likely be like, wow, that's super cool. I get the dopamine kick as if it already happened, and I lose momentum in going for that. So I learned several years ago with all of my goals to keep them inside. And it's not to be secretive, but it's to give them the fuel and the energy and the attention that they deserve and that they require. So I do have 2 big audacious goals that they're probably going to take a few years. Don't really care. The book took 6 years. The TED took 5 years. Time doesn't matter, but it will take the time that it took. But I did promise you a tangible answer, and we talked about this a little bit before, and it's the 2 things we talked about. I'm going to climb Kilimanjaro, and I'm going to learn how to race cars.
Awesome. Awesome. I know that you're going to do that because we're going to see it on your Instagram, and it's going to happen, and you're going to be blown away by how much it changes you, both of those things, and how much what you're doing in your business and your personal life, how that impacts those 2 experiences. Your mind is going to be blown. Because for the listeners that aren't familiar with my story, Craig and I are kind of reversed on our life story. So those 2 things I have already done. And so Craig is doing them now. So that will be awesome. Bear with me. I've just got to shut that off. Okay. Respectful. Now so you've got a seed. It's in a garden. You don't want to, I'm just describing this for the listeners. So as I see it, you put this little seed in, and I have a dog that walks through the gardens that they plant across the thing. You don't want people walking on that until it's strong enough for people to walk on it. That is the greatest way I can see it, until it's tangible, it's strong, it's almost there, and then it's just going to bloom and blossom. Those are your vision things.
It's going to bloom and blossom. And I'd also like to further the importance of not sharing goals in the beginning. Number 1 is the release of dopamine, so that it feels like it's already happened and you lose the fuel to actually continue towards your goals. Number 2 is friends and family may mean well. We kind of touched upon this a little bit before, but, oh, that'll never work. Oh, that's stupid. Oh, those are merely their own limitations being applied to us. And in those nascent stages of big audacious goals, we don't need anybody to crap on them.
Yeah. You do need people, I think, this is my opinion, when you get a little bit further along, because there are people that you will need to help you achieve those goals. So that's when you start, bringing it. exposing your idea to other people so they can help, because we don't get those big audacious goals all by ourselves. We need people to come along.
I can't do it on my own. I can't do it on my own, and I will bring those people in when the time is right. But I'm a firm believer. I can't do. I mean, the TED, the book. I mean, there was a team effort of people behind that.
Yeah, an amazing job on both of them, on both the book and on your TED Talk. So, what I really want to do is you wrote, and I want people to see and really get this, that the only person that can steal your freedom from you is the choices that you make. You wrote that line. That's the way you live your life, right? By the choices that you make.
Our choices can limit us, or they can expand our world. And that is our choice, no pun intended. But are we making fear-based choices? Are we making growth-based choices? Are the choices that we're making, are they going to move us closer to the life that we want to live? Or are they moving us further from the choices that we want to, or from the lives that we want to live? Our choices are so important. And to understand, I'm not going to get this correct, but it reminds me of the Viktor Frankl quote: "Everything could be taken from a man except for one of the last great freedoms, the ability to choose how one responds in any given situation." And that, to me, is just that power of choice. And that it comes down to our responses, and it comes down to our actions and what we choose to do, and bringing that awareness into those choices to ask those questions. I'll give a real quick example. There's an opportunity that I have that is an amazing opportunity, and I've been hemming and hawing on it. I've been delaying it. And so I journaled on it and I analyzed it, and I said, I'm making the choice not to move forward with this thing that I know is good for me. Why? And I literally just journaled on it this morning and came up with some really deep, amazing things. And I then said, now knowing this, what can I do? Before we recorded, I took action towards it. And it's just really looking at, I'm not done with it, but the sheer act of taking that step and making that choice and taking the action has already taken a weight off of my shoulders. And that's our choices. That's the power of our choices.
Yeah, I think a lot of people have, successful people have protocols that they use to make their choices by, and they also make their choices, and whether you call it a choice or a decision or whatever, they make them fast. And if they're off track, they correct fast. Brendan Burchard has a framework which I use, although today I'm having a mind blank on what the acronym is, but he has 5 steps, and it's a framework on how to make a decision when you're presented with an opportunity that includes all the various different pieces. So if it doesn't meet all 5 of the criteria, then unless you're prepared to sacrifice in one of those areas, then it's an easy no on that. So I'll put that link in the show notes, but it's a great one to work with.
I think that's amazing.
Yeah,
I think that's amazing.
I'm done. Can you imagine? I'm finished all my paper. I managed to get all the way through. So I literally just have one last question. How do people find you, and how can they connect with you?
The nice, easy question. I love it. Thank you so much. My website is craigstanlon.com. I'm on Instagram posting content every single day that I hope adds value, because I know there's so much stuff out there, and I really hope that my stuff adds value. Craig_Stanlon. And those are really the 2 primary places. I'm also on LinkedIn, Craig Stanlon, as well. But those are my primary hangouts. And my book, Blank Canvas: How I Reinvented My Life After Prison, is available on Amazon, paperback, hardcover, and Kindle. And right now, I'm not sure, when is this going to air?
Beginning of October, I think.
Beginning of October. Then never mind what I was just going to say.
Well, send me what you were going to say, and we'll get it out in another fashion. Okay.
I'm doing a Goodreads giveaway that expires in August. So
Okay.
I'm giving away 10 free Kindle copies.
Perfect. Thank you so much for spending time with us today. I know the listeners are going to be, their minds are going to be blown by all the things that you've shared and with your story. And I can't thank you enough for coming on and being the first guest in an interview on the podcast.
Debbie, thank you so much. And I want to take this moment to acknowledge you for having this platform, for allowing people the opportunity to come on. I'm so grateful to be the first guest, and I can't wait to see who else you have on. But so that we can, like I said, collectively share our stories. And you've created this platform for people to do that, to unshackle themselves. And I think that is so amazing. So thank you for that. I absolutely loved our conversation today.
Me too. This is Conversations with Debbie. Thank you very much, Craig, and have an amazing week.
You too.
Guys, are you as excited as me after listening to Craig and you just can't wait to share the episode? Well, we've got a special treat for you. This interview, plus 2 more crazy powerful interviews, all on video, along with some live training with me in our Bounce Back Entrepreneurs series. Get exclusive front-of-the-line access. So just head on over to our central home on the web, debbiecolburn.com/links/. So that's Debbie Colburn, DebbieColburn.com/links/ and drop your email in to open up the All Access viewing page. See you there.